Hi, good evening, and welcome to D66 International's webcast on art and activism. In this webcast, we will delve into LGBTIQ rights in Lebanon and focus specifically on the activities of Beirut Pride and the role pride and art can play in promoting equal rights for LGBTIQ people. Joining us digitally is Hedy Demien, founder of Beirut Pride. And my name is Alexander Hemmelberg. I work for CUC Netherlands, in which I support LGBTI organizations around the world at the United Nations. And next to that, I'm also the vice chairman of D66 Amsterdam and a candidate for the parliamentarian elections in Holland in March. Before we start, I would like to share some house rules during this webcast. We are streaming this webcast live on YouTube with participants joining us through Zoom. And to our Zoom audience, I would say, please put yourselves on mute all the time. If you have any questions, post these questions in the chat box, and my colleagues will share your questions with me on the side. In the last 15 minutes, I will ask you to unmute yourself to give you the opportunity to present your question. Please also note that your voice will be recorded when live streamed to our YouTube audience. And of course, if you are using the chat, please use friendly language that shows respect to all participants and the entire audience without any forms of discrimination. Thank you. Hedy, we're here. Thank you for joining us. Would you please also introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, Alexander. Glad to be here with you all. My name is Hedy. I use the male pronouns he, his, him. As you said, I am the founder of Beirut Pride, and I was elected last October as co-president of Interpride. Interpride is the organization that gathers pride associations across the globe. Next to my pride activities, I work in international events and communications on projects related to business, sports, art, and culture. I'm also a grant writer, an art curator. I sit on the board of numerous festivals, and I was an executive officer for many of them, lecturer at university in political communications and event design, and I chair a working group on public-private partnerships.
That is a lot for us, for the audience also to cope with, but in the next 45 minutes, we'll get to know you much better and also the important work that you have been doing in Lebanon. And Hedy, the situation of LGBTIQ people in Lebanon is not always easy, to put it mildly. Could you please explain to us a little bit more about the current state of LGBTIQ rights in Lebanon and Beirut?
Well, where to start from? Criminal code and application, tribunal rulings, the current situation in Lebanon. Well, article number 534 in the criminal code of Lebanon mentions that sexual intercourse that is against nature is punishable. The mention against nature is unclear. So prosecutors and judges have interpreted to prosecute people they suspect of engaging in non-heterosexual activities, namely homosexuals and transgender people. This means arbitrary detentions, cracking down on venues with violence, with humiliation. This means abuses in detention centers, in courts. And when condemned for homosexuality, people carry the mention sodomite or pervert or sexual deviant on their police record for 10 years. And this undermines employment opportunities, visa applications to some countries, etc. So in this context, our top priority is decriminalization of LGBTIQ+ status. Since the 1990s, LGBTIQ+ people have been more and more visible in Lebanon. This led several organizations to open up, LGBTIQ+ businesses to flourish, and the first edition of Beirut Pride to happen in 2017. You know, Alexander, visibility is important, is crucial to deconstruct myth, lies, and prejudice that have been surrounding our reality. And visibility was also key, and it contributed very largely to the 9 recent exceptional tribunal decisions that did not criminalize people for homosexuality, for cross-dressing, and for being transgender. Individual judges ruled that homosexuality was not a crime. Also, the former military prosecutor refused to press charges against army men who were brought before him 2 times. There are also other cases that people wanted to keep discretion about and they didn't want to make public. But these remain individual rulings, and homosexuality in particular is still criminalized in Lebanon. So we have this article 534, number 534, but also there are other articles in the same criminal code that mention sexual, that law enforcement officers tap into in order to halt LGBTIQ plus events. Articles that speak about disruption of public order, articles that speak about immorality, incitement to debauchery, etc. And that was the official reason for cracking down on Beirut Pride in 2018 when I was arrested. And the next year in 2019, they used the same reasons to intimidate the venues that were hosting our third Beirut Pride edition. And this precisely happened 2 weeks before the start of the October protests of 2019. So speaking of the protests, yes, there are legal challenges, but also the economic situation of Lebanon is disastrous. We are in an economic collapse that is very violent on people who have already been vulnerable, especially trans people, non-conforming people, and individuals living in precarity. And the urgency today is really to cater to these basic needs. And to this end, a lot of groups have been working nonstop to make ends meet. But the need is very great, and ongoing assistance and numbers keep on growing.
Yeah, Hadi, that is again a lot for us to cope with, and also hard to understand what the dynamics exactly are, because we are here in the Netherlands following, of course, some of the news that is happening and the protests. But it's also quite complicated for us to understand. So in 2017, the Beirut Pride emerges. And it was, you also mentioned it is the first Pride event in the Middle East region, and the only one in a country that still criminalizes LGBTI status. How do you position this? What are the goals of the Beirut Pride, and the general? How did the general public, for instance, receive this? Because I can imagine there were different types of reactions to this, also amidst those protests.
Our chief goal is the decriminalization of LGBTIQ plus status. This means separating non-heterosexual behavior from criminal texts and their interpretations. So we were to amend the texts that are used against homosexuality, the texts that criminalize non-heterosexual and non-procreative practice between consenting adults in private. But decriminalization is a massive undertaking. To this end, we have devised a multi-sectoral framework that gathers the efforts of all the sectors of society: the legislative sector, the executive, the judiciary, the academia, the media, the civil society, which means the religious authorities, the celebrities, the parents of LGBTIQ plus people, the media, a lot of people, a lot of sectors, a lot of branches. They all work in concert, in synergy, to eventually deliver the decriminalization of LGBTIQ plus status.
Right. Yeah.
In the summer of 2016, when we were designing Beirut Pride and thinking of it, we knew that we had to tap into the creative sector. My friends and I, we come from this world: theater, literature, design, music, etc. And there is universality in creativity. Creativity, art, pretty things make things humane. They bring topics closer to our attention, to our reception. We had already noticed that people have been talking about LGBTIQ plus matters in their private spaces. And we are wondering and testing how this conversation will move to the public space. So we felt confident organizing Beirut Pride in May 2017, even though many organizations didn't believe in it. And then it was a tremendous success. More than 4,000 people attended the first edition of 2017, and 2,700 people attended the first 3 days of Beirut Pride in 2018, before the prosecutor of Beirut arrested me and suspended all the activities. And then in 2019, the next year, we received very severe threats and hate speech, but we still held 8 events. And then in 2020, with the global COVID, and also with the economic collapse of Lebanon, so everything came together in 2020, and it has been ongoing. We worked on Global Pride, and Global Pride was a 27-hour broadcast on YouTube and other social media outlets that was produced by IPOA and Enterprise. And we brought together people and groups from the Middle East who have been working on LGBTIQ plus visibility. And the media reception has been since instrumental to the work we do. Beirut Pride is reported in more than 340 articles in more than 18 languages. This is very beautiful. Yeah. But also, there are other people who were not amused with this exposure. We were called deviants, we were called perverts, we were accused of changing the identity of Beirut. Homophobes and hate groups were aggressively vocal. They fabricated fake programs, which they attributed to Beirut Pride, and they sent the police to crack down on us. Some religious authorities also publicly called against us. And this climate encouraged others to publicly post calls for death and threats and intimidation, which we all document on the website beirutpride.org and share them, and which we already shared them with the prosecutor of Lebanon for his action.
Right. So Hadi, there were some positive changes and ways to interrelate as Pride with the protests. There were also was a negative impact. How do you see this protest movement, which is still in ways ongoing? How do you see this in the future, in the way forward? Do you think that it will give you more support in the years to come? And how are you going to do that?
Listen, to understand the protests, we need to understand the situation of Lebanon. It's a situation that has been problematic for many years. The peak was reached in 2019. The country was getting more and more impoverished. Unemployment was skyrocketing. Banks were limiting access to our personal money. So you couldn't withdraw your money to transfer, which you still cannot do till today in US dollars. Political lead, and there is also a limit on the Lebanese currency. Political leaders have been engaging in a very polarizing discourse. The government was introducing new taxes. There was no political will to curtail and to address the very massive public corruption of the country. And today, we know that more than 80 billion American dollars have vanished from our public treasury. In addition to this, liberties were curtailed, very limited. Freedom of speech was attacked. People prosecuted for social media posts. And all of this constituted the grounds for the massive protests that started on October 17, 2019.
So it didn't only target LGBTIQ people, basically.
This is the landscape of Lebanon that really started, that contributed to this explosion of all of us being in the street. And as you said earlier, the protests are somehow ongoing. Well, you know, they continued under the rain. They continued despite a very harsh repression, very violent aggression from the police and armed groups in Lebanon. And then the COVID lockdowns happened. And then there was the attack on the Beirut port on August 4th. And, you know, we were all in the streets. And I really mean everybody. School kids, grandparents, people of all ages, religions, classes in Beirut, outside of Beirut, in cities and villages. And among all these protesters, obviously, there are a lot of LGBTIQ plus people because we don't live in a bubble. We go through all what the residents of Lebanon go through, in addition to discriminations that we face.
So it's a struggle.
We're there, expressing ourselves individually and in groups. So we tagged public messages against homophobia. We tagged messages for the decriminalization of LGBTIQ plus status, tags against patriarchy, and which we see actually, we see some of them on the screen. And this attracted the attention of the locals, of the press. Of course, others used this to undermine the protest, to say that the protests were led by the gays to push a specific agenda. But also, in the past, LGBT people and friends in Lebanon have often raised rainbow flags during protests, sports events, concerts. And we've been calling against police brutality, humiliation of LGBTIQ plus people, and to demand the cancellation or at least the amendment of Article 534.
Right, because can I ask you a question about this, Hadi? Because very interestingly, it's not just a pride organization and something like a march or events or rainbow flags hanging out of bars, or what we are used to here in the Netherlands, not only in Amsterdam but also other cities, big parades. But you use art as a vector of change, right? So you can check your website, you can check your social media accounts, and you see different types of art. We saw some examples already. Maybe you can show us a little bit more and explain a little bit to us how these examples are leading to change, are a vector of change, basically.
Alexander, art is universal language. It's very accessible. It's much more accessible than speech, for example. We relate to music, we relate to colors, we relate to shapes, we relate to images, regardless where they come from. It allows us to relate to something that is presented to us. So at the very least, art is an introduction to something that we may not be familiar with. We just spoke about LGBTIQ plus graffitis in the buildings of Beirut. You know, graffiti is accessible, it is spontaneous, it is visible, it exists in the public sphere, it is protest, it is in reaction, it is direct political work. If we consider fashion, for example, when you wear a t-shirt, socks, bracelets that display words, slogans, colors, shapes, forms, etc. When you see somebody in the street wearing a t-shirt with the word pride on it, or when you check the Beirut pride bracelet that a waiter in a restaurant is wearing, and when you spot the love is stronger sock, you realize that the LGBTIQ plus discourse is out there in the open, that people are more relaxed about LGBT topics. This creates more confidence, more inner peace. It empowers the youngest. It reassures the oldest that things are moving forward. If you take the example of typography, for instance, this is something that we tap into to reconcile ourselves with the Arabic language.
Yeah, maybe this you need to explain a little bit further, because for us that is difficult to understand why typography is such a battleground as well.
Listen, Arabic language is a language that has not evolved much. There are no proper idioms, words, expressions in Arabic to reflect on societal matters, such as LGBTIQ+, to reflect on technology, to reflect on finance, to reflect on detailed business concepts, and so on. And this is a language that we learn in school because you have the written Arabic, the classical Arabic, and then you have the Arabic that you speak, among each other. So, however, the Arabic heritage is a heritage that is very rich in homoeroticism. It has a lot of references to men who enjoy the company of other men. It has a lot of references to
classical literature also, right?
Totally. And the access to this language is through the letter. So, for example, we understood that every generation takes the responsibility of making language more accessible, trendier, modern. It's not really a particularity for the LGBTIQ plus people. This is something that we all do. And in our case, when, for example, we design the Arabic version of the type font, Type with Pride, we know that this resonates differently with people. We know that you are putting on a paper or on a screen a letter in Arabic that is written with the colors of the rainbow. Yes, it is symbolic, but do not underestimate the impact it has on people, especially on the youth and the youngest among us.
Right, and you're also using a lot of theater performances, drag shows, drag projects. They seem to be a big chunk even of your programming. How do you use that, and why is that so?
Listen, for many reasons. First, theater itself, it puts our lives on stage. Theater, it's a simulation of situations. We can project what we want, see how the audience interacts. Another reason is because, as I said, we're tapping into the creative industries to produce and to design Beirut Pride. And I'm a theater guy. I come from this world. I acted, designed for theater, produced. People around me have been doing fantastic things, etc. So when you bring all of this and you put it as a means to send a message both to LGBTIQ plus people, but also to allies, to individuals, and to people who are very critical of what you do, you know that you get the message across much easier. The first edition of Beirut Pride programmed 2 drag shows, a lip-syncing competition, a closing drag performance that was very beautifully photographed. And the next year, the drag queens came together in the first edition of the Beirut Grand Ball, and that was a 6-hour massive show. It was splendid. You had young, fresh, fierce, sensitive people in drag that are such a force that need to be accompanied for the strength to be channeled so they can make the best out of it and put it at the service of their own, of their own motivations and desires. And theater, yes, has occupied a very significant part of Beirut Pride. The first time we had a theater activity, it was to read the Arabic adaptation of a play that tells incidents of homophobia and hate crimes from all over the world. And a few minutes before the beginning of the show, the police raided the venue and arrested me. And that was on May 14th, 2018. And then the next year, in 2019, we hosted a play that documented the real story of women who were trafficked and exploited for sex. It was a poignant performance that offered us an insight into a world that we're not really privy to. And these simulations give us food for thought. They keep us in touch with the environment we live in.
And do you think that the tension that all these art projects and these art visualizations in the public space, they lead to also negative reactions, but also more and more support, right? Also amongst younger generations?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the younger generation is very important because, you know, all the work we do is a work that is building and continuously building on the work that people who are older than us have been doing and did. And it's very important to acknowledge progress. We know that decriminalization is inevitable in Lebanon. We know that all our efforts are going in this direction. We're working against a timeline. We're focused on decriminalization. And the work happens between politics, the media, individuals, groups, NGOs, people in the streets, people internationally, etc. And we see change. You know, before people used to be questioned for homosexuality on the simple ground of their looks, their gestures, because we think they may be gay or bi or you know, these practices have become less prevalent now, at least in Beirut. Yeah. And social perception has much evolved. We haven't reached decriminalization yet, but we must give credit to progress.
Well, Hedy, I was secretly also because of my work, also supporting organizations in the entire region that you are living. I saw the impact that it also had on people outside of Lebanon in the Arabic world and the way they looked at Beirut with a little bit of shock, a lot of awe, and also as an inspiration and giving hope to loads of people, even though in some countries the situation is much worse even. It had a major impact on people's minds, not just in Lebanon. That's just what I wanted to also share here, also with the audience. We are about to go to the Q&A section, but I still have a very important question to you, Hedy, because sometimes we feel here in the Netherlands, we feel a little bit useless. We want to support, and we don't always know the best ways to support as a political party, as D66, but also our civil society, our other political parties, and also the audience and people in general. They hear these things, they see the problems, they want to support, but they don't really know what to do here from the Netherlands because it seems so far away. Would you be able to give us some advice for the political party D66, but also for the audience that is listening in right now? What can they do to support you and your cause?
I will answer this question in 2 moments. First, I will speak about decriminalization, and then I will speak about the immediate relief. The cornerstone is decriminalization of LGBTIQ+ status. So first, we need to ensure that the politicians and the diplomats are speaking to the officials they meet in Lebanon about the importance of decriminalization. We need to understand that the Lebanese criminal code only applies to visiting LGBTIQ+ Dutch people. It is the duty of all governments to ensure that their citizens, wherever they are protected. In the specific case of Lebanon, our politicians listen to representatives, to diplomats, which is something that we can leverage and we should leverage. Second, it's important to constantly be vocal about the fact that more than 68 countries criminalize LGBTIQ+ status, and that every single Dutch citizen visiting one of these countries may be prosecuted for non-heterosexual practice. So it is very important that this conversation be cleared and engaged in. And speaking of engagement, the presence of media is very important. The impact of the media is important. And there's a reason the media is called the fourth estate or the fourth power.
Yep.
The second point to speak to is the current economic collapse of Lebanon, which has a violent effect on LGBTIQ+ people. To give you an example, on the medical side, many cannot buy medication. They cannot go to the hospital because they have no money. They still have to pay medical bills that are pending. Many have lost their jobs, yet they are still to support their parents, their kids, their siblings. In Lebanon, there is no unemployment support and there is no assistance for business that had to shut down because of COVID. Mm. What we did at our own level is that we created a large database of institutions and people who can directly help and support. It's public, it's on the website. You can see it in several categories. What we also do is we refer people in need, people who need assistance, to all NGOs. And we connect people who want help with the people who want to help. So we connect the people who need funds, who need assistance, who need support. And people don't always need huge sums of money. Sometimes all what you need is literally something just to make ends meet. Most of the time, the cash doesn't transit in Beirut Pride, and we ensure that 100% of the money that comes goes to the people who really need it. Right. We do this with a lot of discretion. We do this with a lot of confidentiality, because we need to honor the dignity of the people who already are exhausted. The website of BeirutPride.org has a page called Donations. It shows a path to support, to contribute, and we can take it from there.
That's beautiful, Eddie. That's really helpful. So for the people looking at this webcast right now, either now or later on when they can still visit it on YouTube, go to BeirutPride.org, where you can find everything about you, the organization, but also how you can financially support, which is just as important, because also without money, no show, I would say. And then for us political parties, there was a clear call in the case of Lebanon that we should definitely keep on calling our Minister of Foreign Affairs and the embassy to keep pressuring for decriminalization, right? So and also the Dutch embassy, for instance, to keep up supporting human rights organization and aid in the country, which is not always a given, by the way, in this political climate. So it's also something that is, with the upcoming elections, extremely important to choose your party wisely in this regard, because not all political parties are very much in favor of supporting international human rights organizations and local human rights organizations in third countries. So that's also good to know. Hedy, we have a few questions, but before I start with the first one, I just wanted to mention to everyone that is looking right now, if you do have a question, please post the question in the chat, so the question gets to me and I can post the question on your behalf. But I have a first question, Hedy, that was posed by Karen, and this is about the universal income. The question, here it comes: will a basic or universal income help the independence of, and then between brackets also political artists?
Listen, times are challenging and basic needs must be met. And people, no matter what, people need to benefit. And there should be a net that catches us all when we fall, so we can eventually bounce back. It's also very challenging to remain totally independent when you are financially sustained by a person or by an institution. I can tell you that we know something about it. This is precisely why we haven't accepted, at least yet, funding from institutions and organizations in Beirut Pride. But if the government is the funder of this universal income, then I myself would look at it from an investment point of view and see how to leverage this. Like this really joins the work I do on public and private partnerships, because eventually there is no difference between the government, the state, and us, the citizens. It's the same, especially essentially in a democracy. So it's definitely a partnership here that is happening between the government, the state, and the citizens through this, through ideas and concepts such as the basic and the universal income.
Right. Thank you, Hadi. New questions are thankfully coming in, so I'm just trying to reshuffle a little bit. And this is an interesting one. I don't have a name, so if you hear this question, you recognize yourself. My apologies for not using your name and connecting it to the question, but it's an interesting one. You mentioned already the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on the protest and the community and the Beirut Pride, but could you be a bit more specific on how you, during the lockdowns and during all the restrictions that were there because of COVID, how you continue your art also, because you can't perform with shows, for instance, there's nothing in the public you can probably do, right? How do you deal with this?
Listen, in Beirut Pride, and we didn't invent the wheel. It's not a concept that we invented, but using art as a tool, as a means, as a channel for information and knowledge to pass, and a conversation to take place, is something that we have been very fond of. Before the pandemic, actually, and with the start of the protests and the economic entire collapse, we had created the support database, and we also created a violation form which people could fill to mention, whether in English, in Arabic, in French, the aggressions that they were facing during the protests and so on. We also supported protesters on the ground, and we were on different fronts. We started online meetings, and then COVID came, lockdowns happened, everything was online.
Yeah.
We reinforced our support system to provide aid and assistance. Now we recently accept donations and pledges from our website, beirutpride.org, and we played a key role in Global Pride last June to participate in this massive event and to introduce other working groups in Lebanon and from the region to this big celebration. Yeah. At the same time, we never dropped our decriminalization work, which we daily power through. So it has been for just like for everybody else, it has been a very challenging thing. We definitely miss in-person encounters, and we're looking forward to the weeks to come.
The weeks, the months to come. Yes, let's hope for better change soon, and also vaccines to reach countries other than just the Netherlands and the EU countries in the north, I would say. This is a nice question from Hoba. Of all the Beirut Pride activities, which one was your favorite? Was that a tough question?
Yes.
You don't have to choose, of course.
I do believe that the activity that was the most the most memorable one was the theater one, where the police did the crackdown. Well, obviously it's not a favorite one, but it is a turning point. A lot of people remembered that a pride is not necessarily the celebratory thing that you see in the press, because even when the Pride takes place in Amsterdam, takes place in Prague, takes place in New York, takes place in Pakistan, in Lahore, in Tbilisi, in Georgia, in South Africa, wherever it takes place, yes, there is a celebratory dimension to it, but it is commemorative. It is protesting. It is acknowledging progress. It is reminding people, institutions of what is yet to happen and to take place. So this arrest was very intense because you suddenly see people, you see fear on the faces of people, you see apprehension, you see individuals who've always been, you know, very sure of themselves, very certain of their words, who suddenly you see them, you know, stepping, you know, taking a few steps back. And when I look into it, and I still haven't done this really, I haven't really delved into it because, you know, it comes with trauma, with a lot of things that are outstanding and pending to this moment and so on.
You didn't have time to reflect basically yet.
I haven't, we did the basic reflection, you know, but no, the big thing hasn't been done. On a personal level, it has been done for us to be able to design 2019, 2020, 2021, and so on. But the personal impact on me is something that for the time being, I would say I still cannot really afford to do.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. But thank you for sharing that also with us, Hedy, because I think it shows exactly how the personal stories are very individual, very contextualized, and very difficult in situations as the one that you're facing. We have time for one more question. Let's take it from the personal back to the movement and the wider movement in the region. I have a question of something that we already mentioned, the impact that it already had, at least in name, the Beirut Pride for countries in the other parts of the Arabic world. Did you speak to any organizations in other Arabic countries in the MENA region? Were you in touch? Did you get any feedback? Did you get any responses? Could you share a little bit more about this?
I will share a story with you. In 2017, Beirut Pride was starting on a Sunday, and we launched communication in the night between Wednesday and Thursday. And we launched it very late, and then we went to bed and we just shut our phones. And then when we woke up and we opened the phones, it was literally raining messages and people telling us, "Oh, what a courage! Ah, you did well! Ah, this is great! You're still doing it, etc." And you know, the traction on Twitter and on social media, all these LGBT profiles that were relaying the information. A lot of them are based in most of them are anonymous. A lot of them are based outside of Lebanon, also outside of Beirut and outside of Lebanon. They are based in the Arab world, and which means in Arab countries. And I remember, like, somebody simply said one tweet. There was this girl who said that, "I'm crying but my mother saw me. Well, I saw the tweet of Beirut Pride taking place. I started crying. My mother asked me what was happening. I panicked. I didn't want to lie to her. I told her I'm a lesbian, and then she hugged me and she said that she loves me. And then I keep on crying now. And this is thanks to Beirut Pride and so on." I promise you, when we saw this tweet, we were like,
yeah,
we're doing something and we haven't even started. So you can imagine the responsibility. And then by default, we communicate in English, in French, and in Arabic. And when you communicate in Arabic, you know that you're communicating for people outside, and you're communicating you're doing a global communication. Yeah. We connected with groups, anonymous ones, established NGOs, established groups, who wanted to have conversations with us, which we did. A lot of people subscribe to our newsletter, they engage with us. A lot of them appreciate what we do. They share our work on social media. They ask us when the Type with Pride Arabic font will be released, for example. When we were doing Global Pride, for instance, we added the Hijri calendar to the Arabic version of Global Pride as a wink to to the people of Muslim faith, the people who often find themselves at the receiving end of a lot of prejudice and misunderstanding. We participate in regional meetings when we are invited. We understand our impact because we have the burden of being the only pride in the MENA region. However, we don't claim that we know it all, that there is one size that fits everybody. We have no pretension to tell people this is how we do it and therefore you should consider doing it, because every place has to design its own processes. Beirut, yes, has traditionally been, for several reasons, whether cultural or geopolitical, it has been the city that spearheads many movements that eventually took importance in the entire MENA region. But we better do things well in Beirut and Lebanon before we go to other places. However, we are happy to share our approach. Right. We are happy to make introductions. We're happy to accompany people, groups, and institutions. We're happy to invest the spaces that we have created and the connections we have made to facilitate the work of the others. But we do all of this at the pleasure, at the discretion, and at the request of people, groups, and institutions.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you, Hedy, and again, to do all of this and to even be able to respond to those questions also outside of Beirut and outside of Lebanon. Again, people go to beirutpride.org if you would like to support the organization. Hedy Demiem, founder of Beirut Pride, thank you so much for being with us and to share your experience that also showing the way you personally touches you. Because I know it's not easy. So thank you so much for being here and spending 45 minutes with us. Your time is precious to us. This is the end of the webcast, unfortunately. Time is up. I would also like to thank the audience. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. And please also keep an eye on D66 International's website. We will close this webcast, but I'm sure there will be many more to come, even also on LGBTIQ rights in the Middle East. Please keep on following us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you again, Hedy, and